how does a man architect the greatest wealth-generating engine in the history of, well, modern capitalism, amass billions of dollars, fundamentally alter global business, and
And
yet
not keep it so under the radar.
exactly deliberately engineer his life so that you, listening to this right now, and the vast majority of everyday Americans have absolutely no idea who he is?
It really is the ultimate paradox of modern wealth. I mean, we live in a culture where billionaires are literally launching themselves into space just to get on the evening news.
Right.
But this man spent nearly a century building an empire entirely from the shadows.
So today we are doing a deep dive into those engineered shadows. We're talking about Charles Thomas Munger, Charlie Munger, the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway,
The architect.
the architect himself. On November 28th, 2023, the calendar marked the end of an era. He passed away at the age of 99. And, there's this deeply poignant detail about his passing that just kind of stops you in your tracks.
Yeah, the timing of it.
He died exactly 33 days before his 100th birthday.
Just a month shy of a full century. And think about what that century spanned, The Great Depression, World War II, the rise of the internet, the entire modern digital economy.
It's a massive sweep of history.
It is. And through all of those seismic shifts, his operating system, his way of thinking, it never broke down. It just compounded.
And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now, because whether you are a seasoned financial veteran who, I don't know, tracks global market trends in your sleep.
Which sounds exhausting, by the way.
It really does. Or, on the flip side, if you're someone who feels a wave of anxiety just looking at a 401k statement, this deep dive is custom tailored for you.
Absolutely.
We aren't just going to recite a dry biography today. We are going to extract Charlie Munger's most actionable wisdom. We're breaking down the mechanics of how wealth is actually created, dissecting his famously complex mental models, and turning them into insights you can use, not just in your portfolio, but in how you make everyday life decisions.
And we're drawing from two really rich sources for this analysis. First, an aggregation of Munger's core life philosophies and biographical facts.
The essentials.
Right. And second, something incredibly revealing. Warren Buffett's 2023 annual shareholder letter. And I have to say, this specific letter was not your typical dry corporate earnings report.
No, not at all.
It was a deeply personal reflection. It essentially served as a eulogy, a confession of past mistakes, and a profound tribute to the man who actually built the machine.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I am really hung up on this idea of anonymity. Let's start right there. The sheer scale of his success makes his lack of fame feel almost mathematically impossible to me.
It does seem counterintuitive.
Right, like Munger was born in Omaha, Nebraska on New Year's Day in 1924. He dies nearly 100 years later with a net worth hovering around $2.6 billion.
That's billion with a B.
Exactly. And yet, if you walk down the street today and ask 100 people who Charlie Munger is, maybe one or two know. How does a titan of industry pull that off?
Well, he pulled it off because it wasn't an accident. It wasn't some, failure of his PR team. It was a meticulously engineered choice.
A choice to stay hidden.
Yes. Buffett's 2023 letter makes this incredibly explicit. Munger never sought to take credit for his role as the creator. He voluntarily, and apparently quite happily, stepped back so that Warren Buffett could take all the bows.
He just handed over the spotlight.
Completely. He let Buffett take the magazine covers, the television interviews, the whole title of the Oracle of Omaha.
Oh, wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. In the upper echelons of extreme wealth, ego is usually the fuel. Like, you don't get to be a billionaire by being a wallflower.
Usually no.
People want their names on hospital wings, on university libraries, on these towering skyscrapers. You're telling me a man brilliant enough to build Berkshire Hathaway just genuinely didn't care about the spotlight? It sounds, I don't know, almost suspiciously humble.
What's fascinating here is that it's less about traditional humility and more about a ruthless optimization of his own psychology.
Optimization, how so?
To really grasp this, look at the defining metaphor Buffett uses in the letter. Buffett writes that in the physical world, when you stare up at a majestic skyscraper, history always links that building to the architect who drew the blueprints.
Sure, the visionary.
Right. Meanwhile, the general contractor, the people who actually poured the concrete and installed the glass, they're largely forgotten by history.
Yeah, nobody remembers the guy who physically riveted the steel on the Empire State Building.
Exactly. But Buffett insists that at Berkshire Hathaway, the exact opposite occurred. Buffett writes that he himself was merely the general contractor.
Wow, he calls himself the contractor?
Yes, he carried out the daily construction. But Charlie Munger, Buffett insists, must forever be credited as the absolute architect of the present Berkshire Hathaway. Munger drew the foundational blueprint.
So it's kind of like the dynamic between a legendary movie director and the lead actor.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Like, the actor Buffett in this case is the face on the poster. But the director, Munger, is the one actually framing the shots, writing the rules of the universe, and guiding the production from behind the camera.
That's exactly it.
But to go back to my question, why surrender the credit? Why be the unseen director?
Because of what that lack of ego unlocked for his brain. Munger lacked that specific vanity, and it became his ultimate superpower. When you don't care about who gets the credit, your mind is entirely free to focus on the absolute, objective truth of a situation.
Ah, because you don't have to defend your own brilliance.
Exactly. Think about how many bad corporate decisions or even bad personal decisions, are made because someone feels they have to defend a terrible idea simply because it was their idea.
Oh, totally. We see that all the time. People double down on bad choices just to save face.
Right. Ego creates a distortion field. Munger just completely removed the distortion field.
So he could look at a massive financial deal and say, this is garbage, without worrying about office politics or whose toes he was stepping on.
Precisely. And that lack of ego deeply informed their emotional dynamic as partners. The sources tell us they met in 1959. Munger was 35 years old at the time.
Which is surprising, actually, given they were both from Omaha.
It is. They wandered the exact same childhood streets, but they didn't officially meet until Munger was an adult living elsewhere. But when they finally connected, Buffett described the relationship as part older brother, part loving father.
And there is this specific behavioral detail in the letter that absolutely floored me. Buffett writes that even when Munger knew he was 100% right about a business decision, he would still give Buffett the reins.
He let him make the final call.
Yeah, he would let Buffett make the call. And when Buffett inevitably blundered, which he did, Munger never, not once in their decades of partnership, reminded him of the mistake. No, I told you so. Never.
Which is the ultimate proof of that secure ego we were just talking about. If you don't need the cheap dopamine hit of rubbing your partner's nose in a failure, you preserve the absolute trust required to make $50 billion decisions together.
It's an incredible level of discipline.
It really is. And that foundational trust, that unique dynamic, is exactly what allowed Munger to stage a massive intervention in 1965, an intervention that fundamentally altered the trajectory of capitalism.
Okay, let's set the scene for 1965, because this is the pivot. This is the moment the universe of Berkshire Hathaway actually sparks into existence.
The Big Bang.
Exactly. At this time, Warren Buffett, our general contractor, is managing a relatively small investment partnership, and he goes out and buys a controlling stake in a New England textile manufacturing company.
A dying, struggling business.
Right, named Berkshire Hathaway. Buffett thinks he scored this brilliant deal. And Charlie Munger looks at this dying textile mill and bluntly tells him, Warren, that was a dumb decision.
And we really have to examine the stakes of this confrontation. When Munger offered this critique, he had zero financial skin in the game.
Wait, none?
None. He wasn't a partner. His family didn't have a single dime invested in Buffett's fund. Furthermore, neither of them expected that Charlie Munger would ever own a single share of Berkshire stock in his entire lifetime.
So he wasn't trying to protect his own wallet at all?
Not even a little bit. He was acting purely as a rational friend looking at a flawed blueprint.
It's okay.
So he tells him it's a dumb decision, but he doesn't just, drop the mic and leave it there. He gives Buffett a completely new blueprint.
Yes.
And this exact advice is essentially the golden rule of investing. Munger tells him, and I quote, Warren, forget about ever buying another company like Berkshire. But now that you control Berkshire, add to it wonderful businesses purchased at fair prices and give up buying fair businesses at wonderful prices.
Let me repeat that last part because it's so crucial. Give up buying fair businesses at wonderful prices. We really need to spend some serious time dissecting the mechanics of that sentence. Please do, because hundreds of billions of dollars swung on that exact philosophy. And I want to dig into the math and the mechanics of this, because if I hear buy a wonderful business, my first thought is, well, yeah, obviously, who wouldn't want to buy a wonderful business?
Right, it sounds like common sense.
Why was this such a massive, earth-shattering paradigm shift for Warren Buffett in 1965?
Because it forced Buffett to abandon the teachings of his absolute idol. Buffett was a devout disciple of Benjamin Graham. And Ben Graham is known as the father of value investing.
Okay.
Graham's entire philosophy was based on bargain hunting. In the industry, it was colloquially known as cigar butt investing.
Okay, break down the cigar butt concept for me. How does that actually work in practice?
So imagine you are walking down the street and you see a discarded cigar butt on the sidewalk.
Okay, gross, but I'm picturing it.
Right. It is ugly, it is soggy, it is generally undesirable, but it has exactly one good puff left in it. And most importantly, it is completely free. Ben Graham's philosophy was to scour the stock market for the corporate equivalent of those cigar butts. Companies that were struggling, maybe in dying industries, completely unloved by Wall Street.
Like a failing textile mill in New England.
Exactly like that. These companies were trading at a price so heavily discounted that they were sometimes selling for less than the actual cash they had sitting in the bank.
Oh, so the stock was literally cheaper than the money they owned.
Yes, so you buy them dirt cheap, you squeeze that one last puff of profit out of them as the market corrects the price slightly, and then you discard them and look for the next one.
So Buffett buys Berkshire Hathaway because it's a classic cigar butt. The textile industry is moving overseas. The mills are failing. But he bought it at such a steep discount he thought he could squeeze a puff out of it.
That was the plan.
And Munger walks in and says, this entire philosophy is flawed. Why? I mean, if Graham was a genius and Buffett was already making money, why did Munger think the cigar butt model was broken?
Because Munger recognized a structural ceiling that Graham's model could never break through. Specifically, the problem of scale and the friction of capital allocation.
Okay, unpack that. What does the friction of capital allocation mean in this context?
Think about the math of a cigar butt. Let's say you find a mediocre business, a fair business, that's truly worth $100. Because it's unloved, you buy it at a wonderful price, let's say $70.
Okay, sounds like a good deal.
It is. You wait a year or two, the market realizes it's worth $100, and you sell. You made a nice $30 profit. But now what?
You go find another one.
First, you have to pay taxes on that gain, which takes a chunk of your capital right off the top. Then, you have to spend an enormous amount of time and energy scouring the market to find the next undervalued cigar butt.
That sounds exhausting.
It requires constant, frantic activity. And more importantly, as your pile of money grows from 10,000 to a million to $1 billion, there simply aren't enough cigar butts in the entire world to buy. The strategy literally cannot scale.
You run out of discarded cigars. You can't put $1 billion into tiny, failing companies.
Exactly. You've outgrown the strategy.
Yeah.
So Munger expanded Buffett's horizon by introducing the mechanics of a wonderful business. A wonderful business is a company with such incredible internal economics that it naturally grows and compounds its own value year after year.
Without needing a ton of babysitting.
Right. And without needing massive infusions of new capital. Even if you pay a totally fair, non-discounted price for it, say, paying $100 for a business worth $100, if it grows at 15% a year for 30 years, the math becomes staggering.
And you don't have to keep jumping in and out of the market.
Exactly. You never have to sell it. You never pay capital gains taxes. You never have to frantically hunt for the next deal. The business does all the heavy lifting for you.
So Munger is saying, stop playing in the mud looking for pennies and start buying castles that generate their own gold.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because changing your entire worldview, especially abandoning the core philosophy of your lifelong hero, that doesn't just happen overnight. Buffett admits in the letter that human nature is incredibly stubborn.
Oh, it's so hard to change.
He writes that he experienced, quote, much backsliding.
The temptation of a bargain is a very, very difficult psychological trap to escape.
Right. Buffett would intellectually agree with Munger's new castle theory, but then he'd see a really cheap, terrible company and those old bargain hunter instincts would just flare right back up.
The lure of the cigar butt.
Yes. He admits he needed Munger to repeatedly partner with him and, in his exact words, jerk him back to sanity whenever those old habits surfaced.
This is such a profound lesson in the necessity of a trusted partner.
Yeah.
We all have cognitive blind spots, you know. We all have old, comfortable habits that don't serve us anymore.
Absolutely.
Buffett needed someone who wasn't intimidated by him to look him in the eye and say, you're slipping backwards, stick to the blueprint.
And the mathematical outcome of Munger constantly jerking Buffett back to sanity is almost difficult to comprehend. Let's look at the numbers provided in the sources.
They are wild.
By abandoning the cigar butts and fully committing to buying wonderful businesses at fair prices, a $10,000 investment in Berkshire Hathaway in 1965 transformed into over $27 million by the year 2023.
An overall gain of over 43,000%.
It's just absurd.
But that is the empirical proof of Munger's thesis. That is the fundamental difference between linear wealth creation, constantly buying and selling cheap assets, and true exponential compounding.
But theory only gets us so far. To really understand Munger's architecture, we have to look at how this played out in the real world.
Yes, let's look at the actual companies.
Right. We need to transition from the 1965 blueprint to the actual bricks and mortar. How did this wonderful businesses at fair prices philosophy actually manifest in the real economy?
The historical examples are incredibly illustrative here. The sources point to two monumental acquisitions. The first, in 1972, was See's Candies.
A class.
That was their first truly great business, purchased at a fair price, and it was entirely driven by Munger's advice. But the crown jewel, the ultimate distillation of this entire philosophy, arrived in 1988 with their massive investment in Coca-Cola.
Okay, I really want to interrogate the Coca-Cola investment because on the surface, selling sugar water doesn't sound like a bulletproof economic miracle. Why, in Munger and Buffett's eyes, does a business like Coca-Cola fit the definition of wonderful?
We have to look at the underlying mechanics of what makes a business truly durable. The sources highlight a few critical factors that Munger prized. First is history and endurance.
Okay.
Coca-Cola was launched in an Atlanta drugstore in 1886. Munger had a deep suspicion of unproven newcomers. He wanted businesses that had already survived depressions, wars, and financial panics.
He wanted battle-tested companies.
Exactly. Second is focus. Coca-Cola stuck to its core product. They didn't suddenly try to become an airline or a car manufacturer.
He just made the best beverage.
Right. And the third factor, which is perhaps the most important mechanical concept in Munger's framework, is that the product traveled. It became a globally recognizable brand.
Why is that so important?
Because it fulfills a timeless, fundamental biological need. The consumption of liquids.
Thirst is never going out of style.
Exactly.
It sounds so rudimentary, but that's the brilliance of it. But let's go a bit deeper into the financial mechanics. When they talk about a wonderful business, they often refer to a company's moat. How does a moat work in the context of something like See's Candies or Coca-Cola?
So a moat is Munger's term for a structural competitive advantage that protects a company's profit from competitors, like a moat around a castle.
Got it.
Think about See's Candies. Why is it a wonderful business? Because of pricing power. Warren Buffett has famously said that pricing power is the single most important metric in evaluating any business.
What does that mean, practically?
If you can raise your prices without losing your customers to a competitor, you have a great business.
Give me a real-world example of how See's Candies exercises that pricing power.
Okay, imagine it's Valentine's Day. You are driving home to your spouse. Are you going to pull into a discount pharmacy and buy a generic $3 box of unbranded chocolate to show your love?
Definitely not, unless I want to sleep on the couch.
Exactly. No. You are going to buy the premium box of See's Candies. And if See's raises the price of that box from $20 to $22, you are still going to buy it because the brand is synonymous with quality and affection.
Right.
That psychological real estate in the consumer's mind is the moat. It allows the business to consistently generate massive amounts of cash without needing to constantly invest in new factories or engage in aggressive price wars.
That makes total sense. They aren't just selling chocolate, they are selling branded affection, which is basically price inelastic.
Perfectly said.
But here is the part of their Coca-Cola story that absolutely short-circuits my brain. It's the concept of the Rip Van Winkle slumber.
Oh, the immense, almost unnatural power of inaction.
Yes. The sources explicitly state that by the year 2023, Berkshire Hathaway hadn't bought or sold a single share of Coca-Cola in well over 2 decades.
Let that sink in.
More than 20 years of literally doing nothing with their most famous multi-billion-dollar investment. They just held it. This encapsulates Munger's overarching philosophy. Most of the time, you should do absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
You act decisively with massive sums of money only when the odds are overwhelmingly in your favor. And then you just go to sleep.
And we really have to contrast this slumber with how they behaved when they were awake. When they finally found a wonderful business at a fair price, they were aggressive.
Very aggressive.
The sources note Munger humorously described their business negotiation style during acquisitions as good cop, bad cop.
I love that image. You can just picture a corporate boardroom Munger playing the tough, uncompromising, blunt realist, the bad cop, while Buffett plays the folksy, approachable, storytelling good cop.
It's the perfect routine.
They used that dynamic to flawlessly execute these acquisitions. But once the papers were signed, they went right back to sleep.
Right.
But I have to push back here for a minute. In the modern world, doing nothing for 20 years sounds downright reckless. What if consumer tastes change? What if a pandemic hits? Isn't it safer to constantly manage and tweak your portfolio to protect it?
That is exactly the illusion that the modern financial industry sells. If we contextualize Munger's extreme patience against the backdrop of modern finance, it becomes an act of radical rebellion.
Rebellion. Yeah.
Yes. The source material draws a very sharp, deliberate contrast here. Buffett notes that modern financial markets exhibit what he bluntly calls casino-like behavior.
Right. He says the casino now resides in many homes. It's not just on Wall Street anymore. It's on the smartphone, right in your pocket.
Exactly. Wall Street, structurally, does not make its money when you sit quietly and hold a stock for 20 years. Wall Street makes money on friction.
Fees, basically.
Yes. They make money on transaction fees, on management ratios, on trading spreads. Therefore, the entire financial ecosystem is incentivized to promote feverish activity.
They need you to trade.
They need you to panic when the news is bad, and they need you to buy when the news is good. They constantly market whatever foolishness or hot new trend can be sold at the moment just to induce you to trade.
It's gamification. The flashing green and red lights on the stock apps, the push notifications every time a stock drops 2%, they are literally hacking your dopamine to make you act.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And in that hyperstimulated environment, Munger's philosophy is totally defiant.
Just ignore all the flashing lights.
Yes. He believed that if you simply identify a company with a deep moat and strong return on invested capital, and you buy it at a fair price, the internal economics of that business will compound your wealth automatically.
You don't have to help it grow.
You do not need to tweak it. You do not need to trade in and out based on quarterly earnings reports or geopolitical news cycles. Fiddling with a compounding machine usually just breaks the machine.
Okay, I am entirely sold on the idea that buying a wonderful business and holding it forever is the ultimate path to wealth.
It's compelling.
But that brings us to the most critical question of all. We know what kinds of businesses Munger bought. But how did his brain operate to identify them in the first place? How do you know with absolute certainty that a business has a true moat and isn't just some passing fad?
To answer that, we really have to look under the hood. We have to examine the operating system of Charlie Munger's genius.
Let's do it.
And the foundational mechanic of his brilliance, the engine that powered his decision-making, was his relentless, insatiable habit of reading.
This is a legendary fact about him. Throughout his entire adult life, Charlie Munger read 500 pages per day.
Every single day.
Let that sink in for a second. I mean,
Yeah.
I struggle to get through a 50-page chapter before my eyes glaze over, and this man is digesting massive volumes before dinner. But what exactly was he reading? I assume it wasn't just dry corporate balance sheets.
No, and that is the key to his entire philosophy. He was building what he called a latticework of mental models.
Mental models?
Yes. Munger firmly believed that to make truly great, rational decisions in business and in life, you could not rely on the tools of a single discipline.
Makes sense.
If you only study finance, you will miss the psychological reasons why our market panics. If you only study economics, you will miss the engineering flaws in a new product.
He used to say, to the man with only a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Exactly. So he drew from a vast array of disciplines. He studied history to understand the rise and fall of empires and currencies.
Wow.
He studied biology and evolutionary theory to understand competition and adaptation in the market. He studied psychology to master human misjudgment and irrationality. He studied physics and mathematics.
He was a polymath.
He was. And he extracted the core foundational truths, these mental models from all these different fields, and wove them together in his mind.
So when he looks at a potential investment, he's not just running a spreadsheet. He's running it through an evolutionary model, a historical model, a psychological model.
And if a business violates the fundamental laws of any of those disciplines, he discards it. It's a multidimensional filter.
That is incredible.
And perhaps the most famous, the most rigorously applied tool in his entire interdisciplinary toolbox was a concept he borrowed from the mathematician Carl Jacobi, the concept of inversion.
Invert, always invert. That was his ultimate mantra.
Yes.
But I need you to break this down for me because it sounds a bit abstract. What does inversion actually mean in practice?
The concept of inversion is profoundly simple, yet it's entirely unnatural for the human brain.
How so?
Normally, when we face a problem, we project forward. We think about what we want to achieve. We ask, how do I achieve brilliant success?
Right, goal setting.
Inversion demands that you turn the problem completely upside down. Instead of asking how to achieve success, you ask, how do I guarantee absolute catastrophic failure?
Oh, wow.
You identify every single action that leads to ruin, and then your only strategy becomes avoiding those actions.
Let me try an analogy here to make sure I, really grasp the mechanics of this.
Sure, go for it.
So what does this all mean? Imagine you are playing a tennis match. The normal, forward-thinking way to approach the match is to focus on hitting spectacular, powerful, winning shots.
Right, you want to serve blistering aces.
You want to hit the ball perfectly on the baseline. You want to be brilliant. But if you apply Munger's inversion to amateur tennis, you change the entire paradigm.
How do you mean?
You realize that at the amateur level, most points are not actually won by brilliant shots. They are lost by unforced errors.
Ah.
So your strategy inverts. You don't try to hit winners at all. Your only goal becomes never hit the ball into the net, never hit it out of bounds. Just safely return the ball to the middle of the court over and over again.
Because eventually, your opponent will try to be brilliant, they will make a mistake, and you win.
Exactly. You win not by being a genius, but simply by systematically avoiding stupidity.
That is a brilliant analogy, and it perfectly maps onto Munger's investment strategy.
Yeah.
Think about how inversion applies to personal finance. If you ask a 25-year-old, how do you become wealthy? They might say, I need to pick the next Apple, or I need to start a billion-dollar tech company.
That's trying to hit a tennis ace.
Exactly. It's incredibly difficult, and the odds of failure are massive. But if you invert the problem and ask, how do I guarantee I die broke and miserable?
Well, you would take on massive amounts of high-interest credit card debt. You would buy a house you can't afford. You would panic and sell your retirement portfolio every time the news is scary. You would co-sign loans for unreliable people.
Exactly. And Munger's point is that if you simply map out those specific paths to ruin and spend your entire life ruthlessly avoiding them, avoiding the credit card debt, avoiding the panic selling, you are mathematically left with survival, stability, and eventual wealth.
The path to success is simply the elimination of failure.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, identifying wonderful businesses wasn't about finding a magic formula. It was mostly an exercise in eliminating all the businesses that had hidden fatal flaws.
He just threw out the companies that were going to hit the ball into the net.
Yes. And his 500 pages of daily reading gave him an encyclopedic knowledge of exactly how businesses historically hit the net. He knew the warning signs of bad management, obsolete technology, and fragile supply chains better than anyone.
And what I love most about Munger is that he didn't keep these abstract mental models locked in an ivory tower. He translated them into incredibly blunt, witty, memorable one-liners.
He had a real gift for communication.
Munger was famous for these quotes. So I want to transition here. Let's take these billionaire philosophies and translate them into everyday, actionable wisdom for the listener. Let's unpack some of his most famous quotes.
I think there's immense practical value here. Let's do it.
Okay. Quote number 1. Munger famously said, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome."
This is pure distilled behavioral psychology, and it connects directly back to a very specific point Buffett made in his 2023 letter regarding human weaknesses and trust.
Okay, what was the point?
In the letter, Buffett quotes an 1863 directive from Hugh McCulloch, who was the first comptroller of the United States. McCulloch warned bankers never to deal with a rascal under the delusion that you can manage him or prevent him from cheating you.
Right, because people are complex and sincerity can be easily faked.
Exactly. Munger's quote cuts completely through the illusion of fake sincerity. He is saying, do not look at what a person says. Do not look at their corporate mission statement or their charming personality. Look exclusively at what they are structurally incentivized to do.
Ignore the words. Look at their reward system.
Yes. If a system rewards someone for bad behavior, you will get bad behavior no matter how noble the individual claims to be. This is known in economics as the principal-agent problem.
Give me a real-world example of how a listener should apply this.
Think about going to a mechanic. If the mechanic is paid a flat salary, regardless of how many repairs he does, his incentive is to fix your car efficiently and get you out the door.
Makes sense.
But if the mechanic is paid a commission based on the cost of the parts he replaces, he is highly incentivized to find problems with your car that don't actually exist.
Ah, right.
Or think about a financial advisor. If your advisor makes a commission every single time you buy or sell a stock, They are structurally incentivized to convince you to trade constantly.
Even if Munger's do-nothing approach is objectively better for your wealth.
Exactly. If you understand the underlying incentive, you can predict the inevitable outcome.
That is such a powerful lens to view the world through. It removes the emotion from evaluating people.
It really does.
Okay, quote number 2. This one is my absolute favorite because the delivery is so incredibly dry. He said, "All I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I'll never go there."
That is the ultimate humorous distillation of the inversion model we just discussed.
That's brilliant.
It's a reminder that survival is the absolute prerequisite for success. In the corporate world, where you're going to die usually means taking on massive amounts of unmanageable debt. Munger and Buffett practically had an allergy to leverage. They knew that debt is the primary mechanism that bankrupts otherwise healthy companies during a recession. By simply saying, "We will never take on risky debt," they ensured they would never die during a panic.
And for you, the listener, where you're going to die might mean associating with toxic people, engaging in illegal activities, or getting involved in highly speculative, unregulated financial schemes. Just map out the abyss and walk the other way.
Precisely. Let's look at quote number 3. It's not supposed to be easy. Anyone who finds it easy is stupid.
Man, that is so blunt. But what is he really targeting there?
He is targeting the rigorous intellectual honesty required to navigate the modern world. The global economy is infinitely complex.
It really is.
Predicting consumer behavior, technological shifts, and interest rates is incredibly difficult. When Munger says it's not supposed to be easy, he is directly combating the modern snake oil salesman that Buffett explicitly warns about in the sources.
The financial influencers on social media. The guys standing in front of rented Lamborghinis telling you they have a proprietary algorithm to guarantee 20% returns every month.
Exactly. Or the pundits on television who claim they can reliably predict exactly what the stock market will do tomorrow.
It's all noise.
Munger is applying the efficient market hypothesis through a lens of common sense. If someone tells you getting rich is easy, quick, or guaranteed, Munger would say they are either profoundly self-delusional or they are actively trying to scam you out of your money.
Embracing the inherent difficulty of investing is the first necessary step to actually putting in the hard work to learn.
Yes.
Which perfectly sets up, quote, number 4, the guiding principle of his entire life. Spend each day trying to be a little wiser than you were when you woke up.
This is the absolute core of his existence. We talk constantly about the compounding interest of capital, how money multiplies over decades. But Munger firmly believed that the exact same mathematical principle applies to human intellect.
Intellectual compounding.
Yes. If you learn one new mental model, if you grasp one new historical context, if you force yourself to understand a complex opposing viewpoint, you become a fraction of a percent wiser.
And it builds on itself.
And that wisdom compounds daily. The decisions you make at age 50 will be exponentially superior to the ones you made at 30 because your mental architecture has been compounding for 20 years.
I love that concept, compounding intellect.
Hey.
But I have to stop you here because this raises the most important, critical question of this entire deep dive.
Okay, what is it?
Everything we've discussed, reading 500 pages a day, building a latticework of interdisciplinary mental models, analyzing corporate moats, it sounds incredibly inspiring for a billionaire with endless free time.
Sure.
But what about a normal person? What about the listener who has a full-time job, 3 kids, a mortgage, and absolutely zero time to sit in an armchair reading psychology textbooks? Can a normal person actually utilize Munger's architecture, or is this just a game for geniuses?
This raises an important question, and it is the essential question of his legacy. And the true beauty of the source material is that Warren Buffett anticipated this exact critique.
He knew people would be intimidated.
He knew everyday people would read his tribute to Munger and think, I can't do that. So in his 2023 letter, Buffett explicitly introduces the perfect, real-world example of an everyday person who applied Munger's wisdom flawlessly.
And this brings us to the Birdie model. This is Charlie Munger's dream investor personified.
Yes, Bertie is Warren Buffett's younger sister, and she is prominently featured in the letter as the absolute perfect mental model for the kind of investor Berkshire Hathaway seeks to partner with.
Let's profile Birdie because she is a fascinating counterpoint to the Wall Street stereotype.
She really is.
Buffett tells us she is smart, she is highly sensible, and she is engaged with the world. She reads 4 newspapers daily. But here's the critical distinction. She is not a CPA. She is not ready to sit for a complex accounting exam. She does not consider herself an economic expert or a financial whiz. She is just a sensible, grounded person.
And because she possesses that Munger-like common sense, she instinctively knows that all the financial pundits on television should be completely ignored.
Her logic is beautifully aligned with Munger's quote on incentives, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Buffett notes her thinking process. If these television pundits could actually reliably predict tomorrow's stock market winners, why in the world would they freely share that insight on a public broadcast?
It makes no sense. It would be like discovering a massive multi-billion-dollar vein of gold in your backyard, and instead of quietly mining it, you go on TV and hand out treasure maps to millions of strangers.
Exactly. Bertie understands human incentives. She knows who is selling a narrative, and she knows who can be trusted. She is, as Buffett affectionately says, nobody's fool.
So how did she actually apply this common sense to her money? Her journey is astounding. The letter outlines that after starting a family and being somewhat active financially for 20 years, trading various stocks, trying different approaches, she finally figured out the game.
She cracked the code.
In 1980, at the age of 46, she made her definitive move. She took her savings and split it. She put a portion into a publicly held mutual fund, and she put the rest into Berkshire Hathaway stock. And then what did she do?
She executed the hardest maneuver in all of modern finance.
Which is?
She did absolutely nothing for the next 43 years.
Let's just pause and emphasize that. 43 years of total inaction.
From 1980 until the letter was written in 2023, Bertie made 0 new trades.
Unbelievable.
Think about the historical events she lived through while holding those assets. She didn't panic and sell during the massive Black Monday stock market crash of 1987. She didn't get greedy and buy speculative tech stocks during the dot-com bubble of 1999. She didn't liquidate her portfolio during the terrifying financial crisis of 2008. She didn't react to the global pandemic.
She just held on.
She held her mutual fund, she held her Berkshire stock, and she engaged in a 43-year Rip Van Winkle slumber.
I am genuinely in awe of the psychological fortitude that requires. In a world where our phones buzz every 10 minutes with breaking news alerts telling us the sky is falling or telling us we're missing out on a massive cryptocurrency boom, the ultimate winning move was to sit perfectly still.
It goes against every instinct.
It really does. It is the purest manifestation of Munger's advice. Find a wonderful business, buy it at a fair price, and go to sleep. But let's clarify something for the listener. Not everyone could buy a piece of Berkshire Hathaway in 1980. Why did Buffett specifically mention that she also held a publicly held mutual fund? How does that fit Munger's philosophy?
A broad mutual fund, or an index fund, is essentially a basket that holds tiny pieces of hundreds of the largest companies in America. By buying a mutual fund, Bertie wasn't trying to pick one specific winning stock. She was buying a cross-section of American capitalism.
Oh, I see.
Munger and Buffett have repeatedly stated that for the everyday investor who doesn't have the time to read 500 pages a day to identify individual moats, the most rational, perfectly inverted strategy is to simply buy a low-cost index fund.
That's the inversion. You avoid the stupidity of trying to pick individual winners.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You avoid the high fees of Wall Street managers, and you just let the overall growth of the American economy compound your money for you.
And look at the result of Bertie's 43-year slumber. The letter tells us that by doing nothing, by acting sensibly, and letting her investments compound without interference, she became incredibly wealthy.
Very wealthy.
So wealthy, in fact, that she was able to make 9-figure philanthropic gifts. She gave away over $100 million to charity.
By just sitting still. Bertie is the absolute synthesis of everything Munger taught. She proves unequivocally that you do not need to be a financial wizard to inhabit Munger's architecture.
That is so encouraging.
You don't need a Wall Street pedigree, complex algorithms, or inside information. The only tools required are basic, rational common sense, the ability to see through the incentives of the casino, and immense unwavering patience.
It is a beautiful, democratizing reality. Which brings us full circle back to our opening metaphor, the architect.
Right.
Charlie Munger was the architect of Berkshire Hathaway. But what he really built wasn't just a corporate conglomerate that sells candy, soda, and insurance. He built a universal operating system.
He did.
A philosophy so fundamentally sound, so logically robust, that anyone like Bertie, or like you listening right now, can inhabit this building and thrive.
The foundation he poured is entirely immune to the frantic, casino-like behavior of the modern world. He built an intellectual fortress designed to last centuries.
So, As we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to pose the ultimate bottom line question to you. Based on his 99 years on Earth, his interdisciplinary philosophy, his incredible pivot in 1965, and his unyielding rationality, what would Charlie Munger tell everyday Americans to do with their money today, right now in this current economic climate?
Based on the entirety of the source material, his directives would be stark, simple, and
Oh,
entirely devoid of jargon.
okay, let's hear it.
First, fundamentally change your psychological relationship with your money. Treat your savings like you are buying a local farm to pass down to your children. You are buying it for the long haul, to harvest over decades, not to flip next Tuesday.
Treat it like a farm. I love that.
Second, completely ignore the casino. Turn off the television pundits. Delete the hyperactive trading apps. Do not let the feverish, highly incentivized activity of Wall Street tempt you into foolish frictional action.
Turn off the noise.
Third, seek out wonderful businesses, or more practically for most, buy broadly diversified American index funds at a fair price. And then just sit quietly. Let the natural tailwind of human innovation and the mathematical miracle of compound interest do the heavy lifting for you over a lifetime.
Just sit quietly. It sounds so easy, yet it is the hardest thing in the world to do. You know, Munger once said something that I think perfectly captures the soul of his century on Earth. He said, "The best thing a human being can do is to help another human being know more."
That was his ultimate goal, not just accumulating billions, but spreading rationality in an irrational world.
He was a teacher above all else.
He really was.
So we want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. If the true secret to generational wealth is mostly just extreme patience.
And discipline.
Right, and if the heavy lifting is mostly just waiting and doing absolutely nothing with your portfolio,
Yeah.
then perhaps the true daily work of our lives shouldn't be stressing over our money.
It frees up so much time.
Exactly. Perhaps our real daily work should be doing exactly what Charlie Munger did, reading relentlessly, cultivating curiosity, helping others know more, building out our mental model so we can navigate life with clarity.
Because if the money takes care of itself through patience, the real task is building your mind.
Exactly. The real task is asking yourself every single day, how will I be a little wiser before I go to sleep tonight? Because if we truly step into the world of Charlie Munger, we realize that ultimate wealth isn't just the concrete balance of our bank accounts, it is the architecture of our minds.